Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ravenstar's Witching Hour. I'm your host and head witch, Miss Solaris Blue Raven, at the helm this evening. Want to give a shout out to everybody at Revolution Radio, staff, producers, listeners, chat room, and thank everyone for tuning in tonight. We are 100% listener supported, so if you like what you're listening to, please click on the donate button. We appreciate your support and thank you for any contribution you can make to this wonderful station. We have a lot of information to cover this evening with tonight's guest. And with that being said, if we have time to take calls at all, it will be in the last half hour of the show, so keep that in mind. And chat room questions are also included in that. And you are listening to Studio A. And my special guest this evening is Tom Carey. Thomas J. Carey, a native Philadelphian, holds degrees from Temple University, B.S. in Business Administration, and California State University, Sacramento, M.A. in Anthropology, and also attended the University of Toronto in its Ph.D. program in Anthropology. An Air Force veteran who held a top-secret crypto clearance, Tom is now a retired Philadelphia area businessman. He has been a Mutual UFO Network, MUFON State Section Director for Southeastern Pennsylvania from 1986 to 2001, a Special Investigator for the J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies, CUFOs from 1991 to 2001, and a member of the CUFOs Board of Directors from 1997 to 2001. Tom began investigating aspects of the Roswell Incident in 1991 for the Roswell investigative team of Kevin Randle and Don Schmitt, and since 1998 has teamed exclusively with Don Schmitt to continue a proactive investigation of the case. Tom has authored or co-authored more than 40 published articles about the Roswell events of 1947 and has contributed to a number of books on the subject as well. He has appeared as a guest on many radio and TV shows throughout the country, including Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell and George Norrie, Fox and Friends, Comcast Network Friends, and Larry King Live, and has contributed to a number of Roswell-related documentaries on screen and behind the scenes. Tom was a consultant and interviewee on the highly acclaimed and rated 2002 two-hour Sci-Fi Channel documentary The Roswell Crash, Startling New Evidence, the History Channel's Conspiracy Theory, the Travel Channel's Weird Travels, Roswell, the Sci-Fi Channel's Sci-Fi Investigates, and the History Channel's The UFO Hunters. He was also a featured interviewee on the 20th Century Fox Golden Anniversary to re-release DVD of the 1951 sci-fi classic The Day the Earth Stood Still. His 2007 book, co-authored with Don Schmitt, Witness to Roswell, Unmasking the 60-Year Cover-Up, was the #1 best-selling UFO book in the world in 2007 and 2008. Its sequel, Witness to Roswell, Unmasking the Government's Biggest Cover-Up, published 2009, still remains a bestseller. Both books are considered to be the best books ever written about the Roswell incident. A motion picture based upon these books, titled Magic Men, is nearing production, as is a TV miniseries based on the book. A new book about the secret history of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, titled Inside the Real Area 51, also co-authored with Don Schmitt, was just released in August of 2013, a week after the CIA finally confirmed the existence of Area 51. Another book about Roswell with Don Schmitt and fellow researcher Kevin Randle is in preparation for a 2014 release. Another archaeological dig at the Roswell crash site is planned for later this year. At this point, Tom is 99.99% certain that an extraterrestrial vehicle with crew crashed just north of the town of Roswell, New Mexico in the late evening of July 2nd, 1947. There is 0% chance that this was a weather balloon, a Project Mogul balloon, or an anthropomorphic dummies from high-altitude parachute drops made during the 1950s. Occam's razor demands this conclusion as we speak. His website is roswellinvestigator.com. And please welcome Tom to the show this evening. And Tom, are you there?
I am here, Solaris. Nice to be with you.
Oh, it's great to have you on. Thank you so much for coming. I know you have a very busy schedule, so I'm very pleased to have you on tonight.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear your voice, too. And, I appreciate all the work you've been doing, and especially this recent book you put out with your co-author here. It's we really needed a historical benchmark pertaining to the Roswell case, and I'm really appreciative that you've done this with the finer details pertaining to the event itself. So just kind of a special thank you for doing that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, it really means a lot. And, let's talk about your book. I mean, let's just get started right here and talk about Inside the Real Area 51, The Secret of Wright-Patterson. And I'd like to start in the very beginning. I mean, insofar as I know we haven't talked yet, but insofar as the press release goes and the capturing of the flying disc, can you talk a little bit about how Marcel was ordered to fly some of the wreckage to Wright Field with a preliminary stop for the weather balloon press conference? And did they switch the materials? Is that what happened?
Yes, Marcel, Major Jesse Marcel, who we're talking about, was the base intelligence officer, the 509th Bomb Group's intelligence officer. And when the rancher, Mac Brazel, came into town, into Roswell, he brought a couple boxes of the wreckage, this strange wreckage that had that he found on the morning of July the 3rd in one of his sheep pastures. And so he went to the sheriff's office, and the sheriff didn't believe his story. He thought he was, wow, what's this guy talking about? And he told Brazel, well, anything that came from the sky, which is where this wreckage apparently came from, he said was the purview of the Air Force, or the Air Corps, as it was called back then, which they had a base just south of the town of Roswell. The 509th Bomb Group was stationed at the Roswell Army Airfield, just 7 miles south of Roswell. I was there 3 weeks ago. And the 509th was the most elite unit in the military, in our military forces. It was the outfit that dropped the 2 atomic bombs to end World War II in 1945 on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. After the war, they relocated to Roswell. And so it's not some stumblebum outfit that we're talking about. It's the best we got. Marcel was the intelligence officer for this bomb group. So when the rancher by the name of Mac Brazel brought some of this material into town, into the sheriff's office, the sheriff called the air base at Roswell, the Roswell Army Airfield, and they summoned Marcel, who was at lunch at the time. It was a Sunday afternoon, about noontime, and they summoned Marcel, who was eating lunch, and he came over to the sheriff's office, and he was sufficiently interested in the material. It was exotic. It was like something he had never seen before, and so he took some of it back, a couple pieces back to the base commander, William Blanchard, Colonel Blanchard, and Blanchard said, well, get yourself, follow the rancher out to where all this stuff is located. Take whoever you want with you. And so Marcel took the counterintelligence chief, who was a captain named Sheridan Cabot, with him. So these are the 2 top intelligence guys on the base at the time. Followed the rancher, Mac Brazel, out to the ranch. Well, they got there late in the day, so they stayed overnight in a little shack, a little bunkhouse that's still there, called the Hines House, where they ate a cold can of Campbell's beans and what do they beans and ham or something that they used to have in a can. Mm-hmm. So they had that for dinner, and at first light they went out to the sheep pasture where Brazel found all this stuff, and there was just the pasture was covered with these little pieces of looked like aluminum foil. Some of it was stiff, you couldn't bend it, and other pieces were very supple, you could wad it up in your hand, and so you had a potpourri of types of metal there, and just covering the sheep pasture. So to make a long story short, they bring some of the wreckage back to the base. Marcel stops at his house on the way home. It's 2 a.m. the next morning, and just to show his wife and son, Jesse Jr., who unfortunately just passed away a couple months ago. We were down in Roswell. He was one of the speakers, like myself, down there, and he looked fine, but he passed away, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so he wanted to show his wife and child what Jesse Sr. believed right from the first, that this was something extraterrestrial. He said it was something that had come to Earth had fallen to Earth, but was not of the Earth or was not from the Earth. And he wanted to show his wife and son this material because, as he told them, they would probably never get another look at it, which they didn't. So after that, he goes to the base, and the morning meeting, the following morning, they had a meeting, the Colonel Blanchard and his staff, and they passed around pieces of this stuff, and they were deciding what to do with it. And the next higher command was in Fort Worth, Texas, the 8th Air Force, of which the 509th Bomb Group was a part. And the commanding officer was a general named Roger Ramey. And so Ramey wanted to see some of this material. And so they fill up a B-29 called Dave's Dream. They fill up a B-29 in the bomb bay with a lot of this material that Cavett and Marcel had brought back. And the original plan was to fly that to Wright-Patterson in Dayton, Ohio, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. But they stopped over it in Fort Worth at Carswell to show the general some more of this stuff, and also to show the general exactly where they found this. And so Marcel goes up to, they land in Fort Worth, so Marcel goes up to the general's office. The general isn't there. He's, where's the general? Well, he's feeling a phone call from Washington. He's talking to General Vandenberg, and because Vandenberg had sent him a telex, and they were discussing it. And so Ramey comes into the office, and he says, "Okay, Major, let's go into the map room. Show me where you found this stuff." So they go into the map room, and so they're in there a few minutes, and after Marcel shows Ramey exactly where it was on the map, they come out, and Marcel notes that the material that he brought is not there, and in its place on the floor is a weather balloon, a decaying weather balloon, rubber, and a tinfoil radar target, a Raywin radar target that someone had ripped up on the floor. And he's going, "General, well, what is this? This is not what I brought here." He says, "Major Marcel, you just shut up and keep your mouth shut. Don't say anything." And so in comes the press, which consisted of, I think, one photographer from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. And they take photographs of, 2 photographs of Marcel kneeling with the weather balloon and the radar target, 2 shots of Ramey by himself, General Ramey by himself, kneeling by the balloon and weather target, and and 2 more of General Ramey and his adjutant, Colonel Thomas J. Dubose, sitting in a chair looking at the radar target and the weather balloon. So there's a total of 6 photos taken to sort of put a period at the end of this so-called press conference. General Ramey calls in his weather person, Irving Newton. He's a sergeant, and he's over at the weather station. He says, "Newton, get over here right now. I want you to identify something." And so Newton comes over, and General Ramey says, "Well, what is that on the floor, Sergeant Newton?" He says, "Well, that's a Raywin target, General, and a weather balloon that's decaying." "Well, that's right." And so that was the end of the press conference. Ramey says, "That flight to Wright-Patterson, Major Marcel, is now canceled." So he makes a big histrionic declaration that he's canceling the flight. It's a weather balloon. You guys over at Roswell, with your finger on the atomic trigger, you couldn't tell the difference between a weather balloon and a craft from another planet. And wouldn't we all be happy to hear that? So that was the end of the press conference. Marcel stays overnight and flies back the next day to Roswell. And that was the end. That was the end of the Roswell story. It was a 2-day story in the press. The first one that they had captured. That's the term they used. That they had captured a flying saucer near Roswell. They gave no details. They mentioned Major Marcel, but that was it. But they gave no details. Just that the instrument, that's what they called it, the instrument was being flown to higher headquarters, which was in Fort Worth. And the next day, the headline was General Ramey empties Roswell saucer. It's a weather device. It's a weather balloon. And that was the end of the story. It was a 2-day story. And here we are 66 years later, still talking about it.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing. Unbelievable. And why was Wright Field selected as a location for transporting the materials? I mean, what was the big attraction?
Wright-Patterson, and I won't go into all the different names it had, because if you read the history of Wright-Patterson, you get a big headache. Let me tell you, you get a headache. It's going through many iterations of names. It started out, the Wright brothers, of course, developed their flying contraption in 1903. Well, they wanted to, and they were bicycle mechanics and bicycle makers, and but they did this aircraft thing on the side, and when it actually flew, you know, they concentrated on the aircraft, and they said, well, we got to have a place where we can test out and develop our flying machine. And so they picked a flat plain just north of Dayton, Ohio, and they made an airstrip. They called it Wilbur Wright Field, and that was in 1903. Well, along comes World War I, and the military takes it over in 1917. And it's been in military hands ever since. It really came into its own during World War II, when all these functions of the Air Corps were concentrated at Wright Field and Patterson Field. And they didn't actually merge and become Wright-Patterson Air Force Base until the Air Force separated from the Army and became a separate branch of the military in 1948. So in 1947, it was still Wright Field and Patterson Field, but they just referred to it as Wright-Patterson. Well, in World War II, the Air Corps' intelligence function was headquartered at Wright-Patterson. Its technology development, new aircraft designs were designed and tested there, Wright-Patterson. The support functions, logistics and supply, were at Wright-Patterson. So the Wright-Patterson was not only the brains of the Air Corps, but it was also the heart, the beating heart of the Air Corps, the most important base in the Air Forces or the Air Corps' inventory. So when there was one department at Wright-Patterson known as the Foreign Technology Division. That's where anything foreign that in the skies, and usually they were thinking of enemy aircraft. And in World War II, it was Messerschmitts from Germany and Mitsubishis from Japan. And when they would capture, some intact Mitsubishis and Messerschmitts, they would take a model to Wright-Patterson to break it down, to back engineer it, to see what made it tick, for the purpose of designing aircraft or modifying current aircraft to defeat the Messerschmitts and the Mitsubishis. So that's called back engineering or re-engineering. So Wright-Patterson already had that function going during World War II. And so when Roswell came along in 1947, we're talking about a real foreign technology from off the earth. And what better place to take it than a place that already is in that business, of back engineering Wright-Patterson. So that's why the wreckage went there. As far as the extraterrestrial life forms that were found, they had advanced medical facility there, the Aero Medical Squadron, the Aero Medical Facility. They also had cold storage going there. So it was just the right place where this stuff would go. I mean, and all the witnesses that we talked to, they all said that the ones that knew said, "Oh, they went to Wright. They went to Wright Field." So there's no doubt about that.
Right. And insofar as I think there was a quote where you mentioned the archaeologist discovered another site north of town with another intact portion of the ship. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that insofar as how many, were there 3 dead bodies and 1 alive? Is that what that was?
Well, I'll tell you, Solaris, when I read the first book, the Roswell Incident book, I came away confused as to how many sites there were and where the bodies were found. It took me a while to get that figured out. You read that stuff, you get a headache sometimes when your head spins. You know what I mean? But there's 3 sites as far as the 1947 Roswell crash. And the plains of San Augustine, which was the body site in the first book, the Roswell Incident, is not part of this event. If anything happened on the plains of San Augustine near Socorro, it wasn't in 1947 and had nothing to do with the Roswell Incident. There's 3 sites. The first site is where Mac Brazel, the rancher, found all of this strange debris. It was almost a mile long by a couple 100 feet wide. And I was at that site 3 weeks ago. We were doing an archaeological dig. That's the first site. And what happened there was, to the best of our knowledge, the ship exploded. Now, whether it was an internal explosion or or caused by something external, like a lightning strike, which is our best speculation, is that if it wasn't an internal explosion, it was a lightning strike, because it occurred during New Mexico's monsoon season in early July. And they have terrific lightning storms there. And some of the ranchers did hear an explosion. They heard a muffled explosion between the thunderclaps of the storm that was raging that night, of the evening of July the 2nd. So when the thing exploded, and Major Marcel said the wreckage that he saw there told him that it was something that had disintegrated in the air and had fallen to Earth. Not something that had crashed into the Earth, but something that had exploded, and all this rained down all of this debris. So that's the first site. It's what we call the debris field site. It's the largest of the 3 sites, and the fact that it's almost a mile long by a couple 100 feet wide, and it was just chock full of this little pieces of debris. No bodies there. No bodies there. No engine, just these little pieces of debris. And some of them include these things that they refer to as I-beams, that they're little beams that have writing on them, strange writing. The second site is about 2.5 miles southeast of this debris field site. It's still on the Foster Ranch. It's still on the Brazel Ranch, but it's about 2.5 miles from that site in an east-southeasterly direction. And I stood atop this site 3 weeks ago. It's a low bluff, and it's where one of the witnesses who was with Brazel, he was a 7-year-old boy at the time, D. Proctor, told his mother, who told us, that that's where Mac Brazel found something else. Now, we believe that something else was perhaps two bodies, that when the explosion occurred, 2 bodies, well, 2 occupants, they weren't dead yet, 2 occupants were blown out and fell to their demise on this low bluff. And the reason that they were blown out, we believe, was because there must have been an inner cabin or an escape pod of some sort that withstood the explosion, that did not get blown to smithereens. And there were several others, occupants within the cabin, that survived that. But we believe that there were two that were not inside the inner cabin and met their demise on this low bluff 2.5 miles east-southeast of the debris field. The rest of the ship, which was the inner cabin or escape pod of some sort, it was egg-shaped from eyewitness testimony, continued another 30 miles in an eastern-southeastern direction and came to rest just north of the town of Roswell, right near Highway 285, maybe 3 miles from it, maybe 30 miles north of Roswell. And it was there that there were perhaps 3 other dead occupants. 3 other dead occupants, about 3.5 to 4 feet tall, the typical looking grays. But there was one still alive walking around, according to testimony, eyewitness testimony, that there was one still alive. This is what we call the impact site. This is the third site. It's called the impact site, where the rest of the ship comes to rest. 3 dead, 1 still walking around, alive. And the one that was still alive ultimately wound up at Wright-Patterson and lived perhaps until 1952 lived an additional 5 years at Wright-Patterson.
That's really amazing.
It's good to delineate the 3 sites, because it does get confusing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really does. And insofar as the ones that didn't make it, what they were obviously taken as well. Did they do an autopsy on these?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They attempted an autopsy at Roswell Army Airfield. And unfortunately, all of the medical facility at Roswell Army Airfield consisted of about eight barrack-type structures, 8 separate barrack-type structures, all interconnected by hallways. But they were taken to the emergency portion of it, and an autopsy was attempted. We have one of the witnesses who is still alive, who accompanied the bodies from the hangar. Everything was first taken to this big hangar. It's Building 84 now. It's still there. But back in 1947, it was Hangar P, as in Paul 3, Hangar P3. And we have a witness still alive who was in the detail that accompanied the bodies from the hangar to the emergency room. And an autopsy was attempted, and the smell was so bad that they had to abort it. Everybody was getting sick. So they put them in these special containers, body bags, containers, and they were shipped off to ultimately Wright-Patterson because they could handle something like this better than Roswell Army Airfield, which was their mission was to bomb the enemy in the case of war. So they didn't even have a mortuary at the Roswell Army Airfield. So but they did try an autopsy, but the smell was so bad that they gave up rather quickly, and they were all taken to Wright Field, where the autopsies were eventually conducted.
And was there any video footage of that? Any real video footage?
Well, that we can only speculate that they must have taken video. It wasn't that alien autopsy that exactly. You can forget about that one.
Right.
Certainly, I would speculate that everything was video. They didn't have videotape then, I don't think. Everything was photographed, and I'm sure that those photos and film and what have you is still in existence. You wouldn't throw something like that away.
Right. And I have a question about, was there any record or evidence pertaining to a possible radio signal or anomaly prior to the crash that would have been intercepted by our Air Force?
We have no knowledge of that. We have
Okay.
no knowledge of that. Everything to us suggests that our Air Force, our Air Corps, had no knowledge of this event until the rancher Mac Brazel came into town on Sunday, July the 6th. They had no knowledge of it. They would have been out there.
Right.
They would have been out there. They would have known where the crash was. But as it says in the movie Roswell, there's nobody looking for this. They would be looking for this, so it's not ours. So, that's the case. I'm sure that no, we were not aware of it because nobody was looking for it.
Right. And do you know if there was any testimony pertaining to a possible contamination from the dead bodies? You said there was a stench. I'm wondering if that had anything to do with maybe personnel getting sick or anything like that, or a biohazard virus?
Yes, there's another testimony that there were two body flights to Wright-Patterson. One on July the 8th. Of the bodies, we believe there were 4 bodies plus the one that was alive taken from the impact site. That's where the egg-shaped device was found, and the one that was alive walking around. We believe that there were 4 bodies taken, boxed up, and flown directly to Wright-Patterson. We know the pilot, who the pilot was. We know who some of the crew members were, and that flight went out on July the 8th. And so they fly off to Wright-Patterson. There was a second body flight on July the 9th, the day after, where 2 or 3. Now we call these the smelly bodies because these are the ones that were attempted autopsied at the RAAF, the Roswell Army Airfield, and they had to give up because the smell was so bad. But they smelled so badly because they were out in the hot sun from July the 3rd to July the 7th. So that's four or 5 days. So they were decaying fairly rapidly. And so they were boxed up, put in body bags, and flown first to Fort Worth. They went to Fort Worth first. And that flight turned around. They dropped them off at Fort Worth, and that flight turned around and flew back to Roswell. Well, we have testimony from people at Wright Field at that time who said they flew to Carswell or Fort Worth, and they picked up a strange looking, to them, it looked like a large thermos jug. So apparently they put these bodies in something that was really, so the smell couldn't get out. It was, I guess, lead lined or something, but it reminded them of it. They described it as like a large thermos jug, but they suspected strongly what was in it. Because the rumors were flying by this time. And they said that when they landed in Dayton, Ohio, the men were very disturbed who were on that flight. They said they felt unclean. They felt unclean being so close to something that foreign. Even though they couldn't smell it, they knew what was in the jug, some bodies from off the planet, and they said they just felt clean, and for a couple of weeks they could never, they washed themselves, they just felt they couldn't get clean. We had others who were out in the field in north of Roswell who were actually collected these bodies. They said when they got home, their fatigues, their Air Corps fatigues or Army fatigues just reeked. They just reeked of the smell. And they got sick, and some of them even burned their clothes because the smell was so bad.
Wow. And insofar as the one that survived, was there some kind of communication established?
Yes.
Okay. And I guess can you elaborate on that a little bit or no?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We have two sources of communication for that. One was a Roswell City fireman by the name of Dan Dwyer. And when the call came in that something had crashed north of town, now when someone would call either the sheriff's office or the fire department, the call would be routed to both departments automatically. So the fire, they thought it was perhaps the crash of a light plane. So they took what they call the tanker out. They drove the tanker out, which was a pickup truck with a water tank on the back. And they were the first ones to get to the site. And Dan Dwyer, he gets out of the tanker and he sees the wreckage, but he's drawn to the bodies. He sees the bodies lying on the ground and they don't look human to him. And so he's walking towards them when something catches his eye, out of the corner of his eye, something moving. And there in front of him was a creature from another world. And we got the story from his family because he was dead by the time the civilian investigators got the case. But we got the story from his daughter, Frankie Dwyer Rowe, that they said, well, Dad, what did it look like? And he just said, child of the earth. Well, the child of the earth is an insect, but it has a head that reminds the people, at least in the Southwest, because I've never seen one live. I've seen pictures of them. The head reminds them of a child that's just been born because the markings on the skull where the bones have not ossified yet, have not joined together. And you can move the bones of the skull around, and there's markings. It was the markings on the head of this creature that reminded Dan Dwyer of this insect known as the child of the earth. It's also known as the Jerusalem cricket or a potato bug. You can put it in your browser and just put in child of the earth or Jerusalem cricket, something. You'll see what I'm talking about. But that's what he said it looked like. And the next question was, well, did you talk to it? And he said, yes, we did talk. Well, what did it say? What did it say? Or what did you talk about? He says, well, it was the funniest thing. We talked to one another, but we did so without moving our lips. In other words, we talked to one another in our heads. Wow. Well, what did it say? It said, he said, it was more concerned about me than I was about it. He said, because it said, don't worry about me. My comrades are dead. My ship is destroyed. I accept my fate. There's nothing that anybody can do. I accept my fate that I'm stranded here. So basically, that's what it said. So that was Dan Dwyer's story. The other story comes from a lieutenant colonel who was in the Air War College class of 1947-48. And they were flown to the Air War College was in Montgomery, Alabama, Maxwell Air Force Base. It consisted of about 60 officers. And they were flown 1 week up to Wright-Patterson for on the job training to see how a real base worked and things like that. And these officers in the Air War College were the best and the brightest for the future of the Air Force or the Air Corps. So they were handpicked as they were going to lead the Air Corps into the latter half of the 20th century. They were the best and the brightest. So they were taken to Wright-Patterson. And this one day they were taken into this room and they wheeled out all of this strange wreckage. Very thin, very light, indestructible. Some pieces were very stiff that could not be bent. Other pieces you could wad it up in your hand and couldn't even feel it in your hand, but then you let it go and it would flatten right out before it hit a flat surface. We call that the memory metal. And both types were indestructible. You couldn't cut them, you couldn't scratch them, you couldn't burn them, you couldn't tear them. Totally indestructible. And these officers were flummoxed by this. What is this? Where does this come from? Well, they said, well, in confidence, they told them, well, it came from a crash of a flying disc in New Mexico the year before, 1947. Oh my goodness. That's the first a lot of them had heard about this. Well, they were taken into another room, and there was the live one, standing up, walking around. And the story comes to us from a Lieutenant Colonel Marion Black Mac Magruder, who was a World War II night fighter ace in the Pacific. He was the squadron commander. They called them Black Mac's Killers. They won a presidential citation for their efficiency in shooting down Japanese aircrafts, especially at Okinawa. Well, in telling his story, he kept the secret until the moon landing of July 1969, when one of his 5 sons said, "Dad, do you think there's any life on the moon?" He says, "Well, not on the moon, but I know there is life out there." Well, because I've seen it. And he told them the story about being flown to Wright-Patterson in the Air War College. And he says, I saw one that was alive. And he said, "Well, did you talk to it?" He says, "Well, we didn't actually converse, but I felt a mental connection with it. I was overcome by great sympathy for it, of its, and to me, I saw human qualities in it, frustration with its situation, acceptance of its fate, things like that. So he felt a connection mentally. They never did converse by moving their mouths. And his granddaughter said, "Well, what did it look like?" And he used one word, and he said, "Well, whenever it walked around, it just reminded me of something squiggly." That was the term he used, squiggly, when it moved around. So that almost sounds like rubbery, doesn't it? So those are the 2 stories we have about the one that was alive by eyewitnesses.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. And insofar, you said it lived about 5 years. What happened to it after that? Do you know?
Well, according to Black Mac Magruder, to use his term, they killed it. And by that he meant it died. They were conducting some sort of experiment on it, and it expired during the experiment.
That's kind of sad.
So he used the term "they killed it."
Right. And insofar as the ship goes itself, the craft, what did they find out insofar as the propulsion system, if anything?
Well, that's a good question. Because there were no moving parts on it.
Okay.
We had a witness. His name was William Ennis. He was in the 603rd Air Engineering Squadron at Roswell in 47. He worked in the big hangar where all this stuff was taken. And when we first contacted him 10 years ago, he just laughed everything off. He says, "Oh, that was a weather balloon. What do that was a weather balloon. Get out of here." And well, that was 10 years ago. So we wrote him off our list. Well, about 3 years ago, he looked us up at the every year we go to the festival down there in Roswell every July. Don Schmitt and I are speakers, along with Stan Friedman and I think Kevin Randle was there 2 years ago, and a number of speakers, Daryl Sims, and I know I'm leaving some out, but so we go down there every July. Well, about 3 years ago, William Ennis shows up at our desk. We're selling our books, and he says, "Oh, when I talked to you fellas before, I wasn't quite right. I was at the big hangar. I did see everything, and I saw all this wreckage." And he said, I want you two guys to promise me that before I die," meaning him, "you fellas find out what made that thing fly, because there were no moving parts on it, and I don't know what made that thing fly. I want you fellas to find out and let me know if you find out what made it fly." So we said, "Oh, sure. And we're thinking, how are we going to find out? Because that wreckage is gone, and as far as we know, no one saw any moving parts. So how are we going to find that out?" Well, about 2 years ago, a fellow in Florida by the name of Tony Bragalia was on his own. He was researching whatever became of the wreckage from the Roswell crash after it arrived at Wright-Patterson. So to make a long story short, he was able to find experiments that had been done at Battelle Memorial Institute in Columbus, Ohio, at the request of the Air Corps at Wright-Patterson. They had given pieces of the wreckage to Battelle to try to back engineer that stuff or try to analyze it to a greater degree than they were able to do at Wright-Patterson. And this started in 1948. And so Battelle got the project to try to back engineer, or at least find out what this memory metal, what made this memory metal. And it turns out that the main constituent, or the main element of this memory metal, was titanium. And they were doing experiments with titanium and other elements. Well, about a year ago, I was reading one of the actual scientific project reports of one of these experiments on titanium and another element. I don't know which. It was either nickel or zirconium or something like that. And I'm reading it, and it said that the memory metal, when it was actually morphing, shape shifting or morphing into another shape, either going back to its original recovery position or into another shape, that free energy was created. So when I read that, I got a chill down my spine. I said, "There's the engine. There's the engine." They somehow were able, because there was a lot of this memory metal all over the place at the crash site, just a lot of it.
That's interesting.
So they were somehow able to harness the free energy created by this morphing metal, the memory metal, to power their ship. Now, I don't pretend to know how they did it, but somehow they were able to do it to make that ship go. Well, the sad part of the story is, when I learned this, it was like an epiphany. You get an epiphany, like one of those aha moments. William Ennis had just died. So I was never able to get to him that we had found the engine before he died.
Wow. And I'm wondering if these aliens, for a better word, extraterrestrials themselves, if they had part of the titanium or that type of metal in their blood or in their bodies that would have a resonance, maybe a symbiotic relationship with the craft. Is that possible?
Well, that we don't know, but anything, the way I look at it, anything is possible. There have been stories from people claiming that the entities were actually part of the ship.
Mm-hmm.
I have trouble with that, but all of that is speculation, of course.
Right.
And from the descriptions of the bodies, well, they certainly weren't part of the ship because they were separate, but who knows what they were able to do when they were inside the ship, you know?
Right.
Maybe there was some symbiosis going on there. I don't know. It's just pure speculation.
Right. And insofar as that one living extraterrestrial goes, did they ever get information insofar as where that life form was from?
Well, as far as from the Roswell crash, I'm guessing that when it was in captivity, and if they could converse mentally, that someone would have gotten it. I'm pretty sure of that, but we don't know ourselves where that was. We have to, just speculate.
Right.
That it was probably from the Milky Way galaxy, perhaps in our own neighborhood. We don't know for sure, but they talk about traveling the universe. How you may be able to bend space and time, and that's above. That's above me.
It's very interesting.
When they start talking about warping space and black holes and all that sort of stuff, my head starts to spin.
And speaking of spinning, we're heading for a commercial. We'll be right back. A break, actually. We'll be right back with Ravenstar's Witching Hour. My special guest, Tom Carey. Stay tuned.
Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.
Most freeze. That's your cerebral cortex looking for an answer it doesn't have.
See? Even your brain knows you're screwed.
The body's filling with adrenaline right now, whether you know it or not. Your heart's beating fast. It's getting a little harder to breathe. The neurobiological system is telling it to run, but your knees are too weak to move.
Fear is not real. The only place that fear can exist is in our thoughts of the future. It is a product of our imagination, causing us to fear things that do not at present and may not ever exist. That is near insanity. Do not misunderstand me. Danger is very real, but fear is a choice. We are all telling ourselves a story.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. 100% listener-supported radio. Reporting the danger. Unafraid. Right here, where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio. Is your data safe? Do you have the necessary information to assist you in confidently living through just about any survival situation? Is survival and gardening, off-grid living, medical knowledge, or even natural or man-made EMPs on your list of personal concerns? Do you have your documents and your personal information in a safe place in your hands where you know where it is? Well, check out our preloaded EMP-proof thumb drive. Over 3 gigs of survival documents and how-tos, plus the USDA offline food preservation website, and much, much more, including a surprise bonus we just can't tell you about here. With plenty of room left over to store your most important documents. Imagine if a megavirus or computer failure took out your bank, or all the banks for that matter. Are your banking records safe in your hands? So when they get things fixed and repaired, you can say, hey, look, this is what I had. You have it. I want it back. Is your personal data safe? Family records, addresses, phone numbers? Well, squeeze on over to freedomslips.com. Yes, that's www.freedomslips.com. Click the banner on the homepage for the EMP-proof bullet drive to get the full scoop of everything that we offer. So, folks, keep your data safe for your peace of mind. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here. Revolution Radio. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Welcome back, everybody, to Ravenstar's Witching Hour. I'm your host, Solaris Blue Raven, and I'm here with Tom Carey. And Tom, you there?
I am here.
Excellent. I'm going to go ahead and open up the phone lines. If anybody wants to call in, the number is 347-688-2902 or Freedom Screen on Skype. And, of course, you can send me a message in chat if you like. But I did have a quick question for you. What exactly is the Blue Room, if you can kind of elaborate on that at Wright Air Force Base?
Yes. The Blue Room, in Air Force parlance, a Blue Room is the most secret or the most secure room on an Air Force base. And it's usually, these days, it's usually the radar room where they have all the scopes and things like that. Mm-hmm. Well, back in 1947, the Blue Room at Wright-Patterson was not the radar room. It's where they kept all the alien artifacts or the extraterrestrial artifacts, like wreckage and alien life forms. It was probably in Building 18, not Hangar 18, but Building 18 at Wright-Patterson. There never was a Hangar 18. And if you go to Wright-Patterson tomorrow and ask to see Hangar 18, they'll play word games with you. They'll say, oh, there never was a Hangar 18. There isn't any, and there never was. But what they know is that you're really asking about where the aliens were. And that they won't tell you. So they'll say, there never was a Hangar 18, goodbye. Well, the Blue Room was where they had kept the Roswell wreckage and any other wreckage that was off the planet, extraterrestrial. And it came to a sort of a it gained notoriety when the United States Senator Barry Goldwater in the early 1960s, who was a member of the he was the head of the Senate Armed Services Committee. He was also a major general in the Air Force Reserve. So he wore 2 hats. And he was good friends with Curtis LeMay, who at that time was the chief of staff for the U.S. Air Force. And he was also good friends with a fellow general, General William Blanchard, who was a colonel in 1947, head of the 509th Bomb Group and base commander at Roswell. So Goldwater had heard about Roswell from Blanchard. And so on one of his trips to Wright-Patterson, he says, by golly, I'm going to find out. He was also a UFO buff. Goldwater was always interested in UFOs. Honest guy, he was respected. Unlike today, he was respected on both sides of the aisle, both the Democrats and Republicans. Of course, we know today that no longer exists. So he's at Wright-Patterson, and so he calls up his friend Curtis LeMay, and he told this story on television once or twice. He also told it on radio. That he called up LeMay and he said, "General, I'm over here at Wright-Patterson speaking to you. I understand there's a room here at Wright-Patterson where you keep all of the UFO stuff." By that time, they were in the 60s. They were calling them UFOs, not flying saucers anymore. He said, "There's a room here, I'm told, that where all that UFO stuff is kept. Can I have a look in that room? Can you let me in that room so I can have a look for myself?" And he said, so Goldwater says, well, LeMay never got mad at him before, but he cussed him up one side and down the other. And he says, "No, you cannot go in that room. Hell no, you can't go in that room. I can't go in that room." Well, I don't believe that for a second. That LeMay couldn't get in that room, but that's what he said. He says, "I can't get in that room. You can't get in that room, and never bring that subject up again. If you do, I'll see that you're court-martialed." Well, thank goodness they were friends, you know. Mm-hmm. So Goldwater said he never brought up the subject again. But the Blue Room was where all the alien artifacts, including the cadavers, were stored long term, and we believe that the wreckage from Roswell and any other UFO material was kept at Wright-Patterson from 1947 going forward until the early 1980s, when it was all transferred perhaps to Area 51 in Nevada or some other base, perhaps in Florida and perhaps in Utah. Now we have a Air Force colonel who was in charge of the Foreign Technology Division in the 70s, and he died in the mid-1980s. On his deathbed, he said the aliens were kept. Now, this is the mid-80s. He said the aliens were kept in Utah. So that would be the Dugway facility in Utah. So UFO stuff was kept at Wright-Patterson for about 35 years, we believe, and then moved elsewhere.
Is it safe to say you think they probably did some reverse engineering on the DNA of these extraterrestrials? I mean, it's probably speculation, but
reverse engineering on the bodies?
Well, yeah, or something where they were working with the DNA to maybe clone these things. Or
I'm positive. I mean, that certainly they would look at everything. They would test within their capacity. They would go to full capacity of analyzing these entities without a doubt.
Okay, it looks like I have a message here. At least it looks like one. Let me see here. I'm posting it in here. Communication with a nurse and the concept of, I guess, telepathy. This is a kind of interesting question. It's interview with an alien, telepathic communication with a nurse, and the concept of.
We get this question all the time. It just astounds me because that book is a fiction. The interview with what is it called?
With an alien?
Yes, that book is a fiction. When that book came out, I interviewed the author, and I asked him. I said, "Is this book a fiction?" Because the nurses we did mega investigation of the nurse, and there was no such person ever to Roswell. And I asked the author. I said, "This book is a fiction, isn't it?" And he said, "Yes, it's a fiction." So it just astounds me. We get a question every time about this. I just want to be clear. That book is a fiction. That nurse never existed.
All right, clear that one up.
So you can find that book in the fiction section.
There you go. Okay, hope that helps everybody out there.
I hope I'm clear about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because there is so much, like, I don't want to say muddied information, but it seems like it's just crazy. It's all over the place sometimes.
It is. Yeah. It's absolutely the world. Well, that's a whole nother subject.
It really is, but I like the way you guys are very grounded with your approach to this whole information. It's just like step by step. It's really nice.
we can tell when someone is making it up rather quickly. Rather quickly. And and like these, we had these two fellows last year and the year before. They came forward. One was former CIA guy claiming that he found a folder in the CIA library in Langley that was the Roswell folder, and he came out and he said that we got that guy was making it up. He was making it up because he was selling a book. He was trying to throw out a teaser. It was a little teaser, and he was just making that stuff up. I forget his name, but he had a book that he was trying to sell.
That's unfortunate because it takes away from the good people who do the good work. That's accurate.
And this woman, Annie Jacobson. Wrote a book about Area 51. It was about 2 years ago. She should have stuck to Area 51, but she threw in a chapter or a section on Roswell, and it was an absolute joke. It was an absolute joke, but they feel compelled that the Roswell case is so. It's the number one case. It still is. It's known all over the world. It's the best UFO case we have, and people like to use it to sort of spice up their own works,
Yeah, exactly.
But the Annie Jacobson, that it was I think, was she the one that said it was a Soviet trick that they played on us, or
something where there were children or something like that?
That was the way we feel about it is if we hear something about Roswell that we've never heard before, we sort of are very skeptical of it because we've been around that, the Roswell block many times, and we've sort of got a handle on just about everything relating to the case. And when we hear something new that somebody's claiming, we look at it with a very skeptical stance.
That's as you should too. That's why I respect you guys. And you're very, I guess you're hardcore and grounded and anchored in the information itself. And of course, your resources are very, respected individuals. We're talking military and people who have a professional background, right?
Every walk of life, doctors, lawyers, privates, generals, colonels, sergeants. We just every walk of life, pretty much. And I'll say this: to interview people, most of them are in their mid 80s now, the mid 80s and 90s. It takes a certain decorum to interview someone that old, and so we're pretty expert at it because we've interviewed so many elderly.
Right, and they were pretty much sworn to secrecy, though, right? So what makes them open up?
Well, number one, they don't come running to us. We have to find them. We have to dig them out of the woodwork, and it's not that they're coming forward. We have to find them, and they don't always open up. I'd say it's less than 50% that we've located have opened up. But even then, we have hundreds of people who have. But what it is, the ones who are retired military, the ones who are retired officers are the least likely to talk because they're retired military and they are receiving a government pension of some sort. They're the least likely to talk because they don't want to jeopardize, even though they won't, but they don't want to take any chances. They don't want to jeopardize their pensions.
Right.
The ones most likely to talk are the ones who weren't career military, ones who are not retired on some sort of government pension, whether it's military or not. Regular civilians, they're the most likely to talk. The ones who are not on government pensions.
That makes sense.
So those are the main factors.
Yeah. And you have a question here for, this is from Jerry B., but did the Roswell ship have symbols on a console or of sorts that might have been used to pilot the craft?
We don't know. We suspect that there were, because in addition to the I-beams that Jesse Marcel and Jesse Marcel Jr. talked about that had symbols on them, other pieces of the wreckage had symbols on them. So we're guessing that, speculating now, because we haven't found a headlight, we haven't found a tail light, we haven't found a turn signal or anything like that from the dashboard, but we suspect that there probably were symbols.
Okay.
For various things.
Right. And just this is a random question, but I just wanted to know: was there a green room associated with Wright Air Force Base? I know you talk about a blue room. Was there a green room associated with Wright Air Force Base? I know you talk about a blue room.
The green room, I think, comes from the Roswell incident. They mean the blue room.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know also.
Yep.
All right.
Same thing.
Okay, and there's another question I have for you real quick here. I know you talk a little bit about the telex shot and the analysis associated with that.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on that?
Yes. That's the smoking gun.
Yay!
We call that the smoking gun of Roswell. When General Ramey called the press conference on July the 8th, 1947, to put out the weather balloon story, I mentioned that when Marcel first got there, Ramey wasn't in the room. He was in another room or even another building discussing a telex that he had received from, that it was actually a telex. Now, I don't recall if it was to General Vandenberg or from General Vandenberg, but the other party was General Hoyt Vandenberg in Washington, who was controlling the whole press access to this story. And within several months, General Vandenberg would become the chief of staff of the new Air Force when they separated from the Army. Well, so General Ramey, after he's through talking to General Vandenberg, he comes into the room, back into his office, and he's holding a telex in his hand. And it was either just given to him or he was talking to General Vandenberg about it. You can see it's folded over in his hand. Well, there were 7 pictures taken. Well, you can almost tell the sequence of the photos from the way the telex is folded. Well, in the final picture of General Ramey kneeling by the balloon and the wreckage, he's with General Dubose. You can tell he had folded over the telex to where he was trying to read some of it between shots. You have the fellow taking the photos. Well, in between the next to last shot and the last shot, he's trying to read it, and you can see it's folded over. Well, you can almost hear the photographer saying, "Well, one more shot, General Ramey," and so he kneels down again. He doesn't realize that he has the face of the telex facing the camera. The camera's about 15 feet away, and he's got the telex in his hand, but he has, I'd say, the top quarter, the top third of it facing the camera, and the picture's taken. Well, years later, I'm sure he never anticipated everybody having a computer with photographic software to where you can manipulate the photos. Mm-hmm. Well, starting in the early 90s, we started to, we just, all we had was just, magnification. You couldn't manipulate the image at all. And you couldn't really make out anything other than that there were words that were there on the telex. Well, comes the 90s, the late 90s, early 2000s, we now have photographic software where you can start manipulating the images, and we're able to read some of the words on this telex. And I know for myself, when I first looked at it, and this is I'm telling you what happened here. Within 10 seconds, I had read the victims of the wreck you forwarded to the blah 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 at Fort Worth, Texas. So it's already in the first sentence there is talking about victims of the wreck. Well, balloons don't have victims. Even when they land on your head, there's no victim. Radar targets, they're made out of balsa wood and thin foil. No victims. Well, in military parlance, military victims are called casualties, right? They're called casualties. Well, these are victims. And it says the victims of the wreck you forwarded to at Fort Worth, Texas. Well, they're talking about the wreck that Marcel had brought, and they were bringing the victims would arrive. The first victims would arrive at Fort Worth on July the 9th. The ones on the 8th went straight to Wright Field. So the memo is talking about the wreckage that was brought there. It talks about weather balloon demonstrations would make a good way to sell the story of the weather balloons. And we know for a fact that the following day, starting on July 9 and 10, they had held weather balloon demonstrations all over the country at various Air Corps bases, demonstrating this is what people are seeing, not only at Roswell. It doesn't explain not only Roswell, but all UFO reports are these weather balloons. So it worked for a while because it killed the Roswell story for 30 years.
Wow.
And it stopped the flying saucer reports for a short period, but then they picked up again when people continued to see them to this very day. But that's the telex, because it talks about, and you can make out the word disk, D-I-S-K, which is in parentheses on the telex. It talks about flying the wreckage to that something will be coming from Wright-Patterson, and it talks about the weather balloons, and it talks about having a crew, which they had to demonstrate the weather balloon launch. So it's all there. So they're not talking about. See, when I first looked at this memo, my only bias was that, well, it would have had something to do with the Air Corps, something to do with the Air Corps, something to do with Carswell Air Force Base, something like that. I had no bias that it would have to do with the Roswell crash. But it turns out, within 10 seconds, I saw the victims of the wreck. And there you go.
Yep. Exactly. And I have a question for you here from Mark Eddy. It looks like, what about the alien mandibles on page 238?
Yes. The mandible that spoke Martian is the name of that chapter. And that's a story that involves a former dental technician at Wright-Patterson who one day in the 70s, he's now out of the Air Corps, out of the Air Force by that time. He's out of the Air Force, and he works in a dental lab. Well, one day in the 1970s, his boss comes in carrying a small box. And in this box is a strange jawbone, a strange mandible with no teeth. And it's not that it had teeth and they're just not there anymore. It's just that it never had teeth. It's sort of a V-shaped mandible. Now, in my anthropology days, I was in physical anthropology and mostly interested in fossil primate apes and early hominids, and so you get to know, and a lot of the fossils are dentition. So, and one of the things about telling that it's a human mandible or a human dental arcade is that it's parabolic and not V-shaped. See, ape dental arches are U-shaped. They're U-shaped, where humans are parabolic, more gentler curve.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this mandible was smaller than human, but it was larger than, say, a prosimian, which is like a lemur, loris, something like that. It's larger than that. No teeth. In the photo in the book, you'll see this peg. It almost looks like a peg-type molar, but that's not a tooth. That's something that they used to I guess when they were analyzing it, to hold something. But there's a structure in the photo that you might think is a tooth, but it isn't. Anyway, so the dental technician is asked by his boss to make a mold of this. Just make a plaster mold of this, So he makes the template, and then he pours the plaster Paris to make a copy of this mandible.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that's done, the next day his boss comes in. He says, "Well, do you have the mandible?" He said, "Yeah, here it is." He says, "Okay, fine," and he puts it back puts it in the box with the original, and he walks away. Well, the dental tech, whose name was Musgrove, he says, "Well, I don't know what this is all about. I'm gonna go over to the window here and see where he's going with that." So he watches his boss. He goes outside, and outside there's an Air Force car waiting with two officers outside, and the dental tech recognized one of them as being in the foreign technology division there. And so his boss hands the box to the two officers, and they get in the car and off they go. So his boss comes back and he says, "I want you to forget everything that you just did and that you saw. This never happened. This never happened." So the dental tech says, "Boy, I don't know what this is, but that's a strange goings on there." And so his boss takes the template, which remained the plastic template or plastic light material, and he crushes it in his hand and throws it in the wastebasket. Well, after the boss leaves, the tech, piece by piece, takes the template out, puts it back together again, and pours his own mold. He pours it again. He makes a plaster cast for himself. He doesn't know what he has right then, but he knows it's something. So he puts this mold. He got a box at the bank. I guess that's where you can have strong boxes at the bank. He puts it in a strong box in his bank for 20 years. He leaves it in there for 20 years. He gives it to a local investigative TV reporter by the name of Carl Day, to whom we dedicated our book. And Carl Day, when hearing the story, he says, this has something to do with the bodies at Wright-Patterson. He looked at it and he says, that has something to do with the bodies that were at Wright-Patterson. So Carl Day, he puts together a presentation about UFOs, and he somehow is able to give a presentation to officers at Wright-Patterson. I don't know why they agreed to this, but they agreed to let Carl Day talk about UFOs, and he put up a picture of a schematic of what the general consensus of the grays looked like. The large egg-shaped head, and he held up this. Now he has the image up there on the screen, and he holds the mandible, the jawbone that spoke Martian. He holds it up to the jawline of the alien on the screen, and it matches perfectly. And I don't know what Carl Day's exact words were, but when he did that, there was a big commotion in the audience. The officers did not like that. They did not like his presentation, and he was not applauded when it was over. But the consensus from us is that the two Air Force officers had snuck out the jawbone. They wanted a mandible for themselves, and they snuck it out and had a plaster Paris copy made, and they took it back and they put the original back to where they got it, but they kept the plaster Paris copy. And where that is today, I don't know. We do know where the copy that John Musgrove had made for himself. It's now on display at the International UFO Museum down in Roswell. So that's where his copy is. Where the officer's copy is, we don't know.
It's fascinating. It's amazing to me. And I don't know if I asked this or not, but insofar as the strange writing on the wreckage goes, or were they glyphs, or were you able to decode that, or were they able to decode that, rather?
The glyphs?
Yeah.
We understand that a linguist was brought in, a professor, and he was unable to decipher them because you have to have a baseline from which to start trying to decipher a language, and there was no baseline here. They were just symbols that didn't make any sense. So he was unable to decipher them.
Not even with the help of the surviving extraterrestrial?
Well, that's another question. Perhaps they were able to do that. We don't know. Don't know, but yeah, I think that's a good point, though. I would imagine they tried. If they had the symbols and they had the extraterrestrial alive there, and they could make mental connections, I would think that they would try that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
We don't have the records of that, though.
Right, that's too bad. We have Steve Travesty with us. Steve's also a host here on Revolution Radio. How you doing, Steve?
Hey, Solaris. Hi, Tom.
Hello, Steve. How are you?
I'm well. Really wild interview, man. I'm very much enjoying it. What I wanted to know is that throughout all of this, was there any sense of the possibility that that people in the higher brass may have been almost not surprised at the discoveries from the Roswell crash and things that were transpiring through the investigations, as if they knew something already and were seeing what people that were investigating it were going to find out, or something to that effect. You understand what I'm trying to ask?
You mean like they were anticipating people like myself and Don Schmitt and Stan Friedman and Kevin Randle?
Yeah, kind of. Like basically what I'm trying to say is that was the Roswell crash the definitive moment for those that, at the very top of military intelligence, that said, my God, we're not alone in the universe, and there's all sorts of crazy science fiction out there. Jules Verne was right, that kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yes, I believe that's right. Of course, the War of the Worlds radio show was still fresh in their minds from 1938, the Orson Welles Mercury Radio Theater, something like that it was called, where they did the War of the Worlds recreation on the radio, and there was panic on the East Coast. The whole notion of covering this up started with Roswell, and I can point the finger straight to General Hoyt S. Vandenberg for being the chief architect, the one who made the decision that this whole notion of UFOs, flying saucers, flying discs, extraterrestrials will be covered up and the public not told. He was afraid of panic in the streets, That's what we are told, is that he was afraid of panic in the streets, and he was the top dog. And when he says jump, you jump, and they right on down the line they jumped. It's still with us, and it started with Roswell. It started with Roswell.
That's a good question, Steve. And insofar as that material goes, was it? I think you mentioned something that it was self-healing. Is that correct?
Yes, the morphing, self-healing. That's what Tony Bragalia, when he did his research, he plugged in self-healing or self-morphing, something like that, into his browser, and he wound up learning that there were progress reports on such a metal that were undertaken by Battelle Memorial Institute in Columbus, Ohio, starting in 1948. That's how he got onto that. Learned about those reports, and he was able to get copies of the 2 progress reports from Battelle to Wright-Patterson. Of course, they were heavily redacted, and the areas that were redacted, no doubt, were the areas that talked about giving the background of this, why these studies were being undertaken. But they finally came out in 1962 with this. They called it the discovery of nitinol, Nitinol, which was really based on the memory metal. It took them that long to come out with a product. You can put it into your browser, nitinol. It's nickel, titanium, and the Naval Ordnance Lab. It was the Naval Ordnance Lab who was also involved in this. Came out with the so-called discovery, and I'll put that in parentheses or quotes, of nitinol. You can buy it by the roll, you can buy it by the sheet, you can buy it by the coil, and if you trace it back, it goes back to Roswell. So we're pretty confident that nitinol has been derived from the memory metal recovered at Roswell.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. Did you have another question, Steve?
No. I'm all set. Thank you.
Yeah, no, appreciate you hanging out.
Steve, did I answer your question?
Yeah. Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
Because there were no antecedents. I know they talk about a crash in 1941 in Missouri, but I'm not convinced. They had procedures in place for an atomic bomb accident, and basically that's what they followed: the base lockdown, the signing of non-disclosure. Actually, when I thought about it, that we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of the JFK assassination, and there was a show on one of the networks, not networks, but one of the cable channels that puts forth a new theory of how JFK was shot, and the notion is that he was not shot. He was the shot that killed him didn't come from Oswald, but from one of the Secret Service fellows in the car behind the Kennedy car. And so help me, I'm convinced that he put forth such a good case. It was totally persuasive to me, at least, that it was the Secret Service fellow who administered. And it was an accident. It's not that he set it up. It was an accident. That his gun went off. It was an AR-15. The gun went off and it hit Kennedy in the head and killed him. But they kept it. They covered it up, and they used the same tactics that they used at Roswell. They had everybody who was in the autopsy room sign a non-disclosure. They gathered up all of the evidence, speared it away, and no one's has seen it since. It just all of the steps that they took to cover up what actually happened.
You know, I could see the mainstream media going with that story just because it would serve their purpose of banning the AR-15.
I never thought of that.
AR-15 killed President Kennedy. Now we can finally ban the AR-15.
I never thought of that, but it was an accident. The gun discharged when after Kennedy was shot in the back, and they saw he was shot. The car speeded up, and the Secret Service guy had picked up the AR-15, which was on the back floor of the car behind it. And when the car shot forward, he shot back. You know, he fell back, and the gun went off, and it just happened to hit Kennedy in the head. And the way they presented that, the testimony, that just what we did in Roswell, they got it from the witnesses on the ground. They got the witnesses on the ground said they smelled gunpowder down on the ground, and that's why they thought about this grassy knoll, because they heard a shot from down below, not from above, and they smelled gunpowder, and there were like a dozen witnesses to that. And one of the witnesses said they saw a puff of smoke come out of the AR-15. So, just for me, he proved the case. I will say that. But while I'm watching that, I'm saying, my goodness, they're using the same tricks that they used in Roswell to keep it quiet, to cover it up. Same thing. Everybody signing non-disclosures, hiding evidence, the whole ball of wax.
And that's pretty much so they can reverse engineer everything. I mean, insofar as the Roswell case goes, right? Isn't that the main reason for just keeping it, hush hush?
Well, it was several reasons. One, because Vandenberg was afraid of panic in the streets. That was number one. Number two, the Cold War. The Cold War had just started the year before with the Soviet and the communist bloc. They didn't want the communist bloc to gain access to the technology, so that's totally understandable to cover that up. And so in 1947, there were good reasons. To cover it up. But the question we get now is why is it still covered up? And I think it's just one of inertia. It's always been covered up, so they just, there's nobody going to rock the boat. I mean, if you're in the military, your chances of getting the next promotion are not increased when you go to your next person in charge up the line and say, hey, tell me about that Roswell case. How about that Roswell? That's not going to get you a promotion. So, it's one of inertia.
Right. We have another call here at 928. Hi. Are you there?
Hi. My name is Keith, and I'm calling from Arizona.
Hey, Keith. I've heard you before. How you doing?
I'm doing very well, and I very much resonate with you, and really appreciate this discussion of Roswell. I've heard all kinds of very different stories on it, but as best as I can tell, what your guest is telling is very accurate. And so I very much appreciate that discussion. It obviously happened a long time ago, and some would say, well, who cares, but it does matter. And the Kennedy assassination, I would, the best I can tell, I would disagree with what your guest said, that it was an accidental shooting. Jim Fetzer was on one of your shows earlier, one of the other hosts, I should say, and has really broken it down pretty well. As far as I can tell, he was pissing off everybody, including the Federal Reserve, the CIA. You can go on and on. So I think that was an intentional assassination. That's just my opinion. I just wanted to make that point.
Oh, well, it was. Oswald was definitely trying to assassinate him. There's no doubt about that. But according to this one theory, which I, just for me, he convinced me that the shot that there were three total shots. The first one missed. The first one missed. The second one hit Kennedy in the back, and it's the one, the magic bullet. And the third one actually came from the Secret Service AR-15 accidentally. And that was his theory. And, I'm just saying, for me, it was very persuasive.
Yeah, no worries. I wasn't there. I don't know. I'm not pretending to be any kind of authority. Just the
me either.
The
I am certainly no authority on that.
The fact that the back of his head blew off indicated a shot from in front of him, and
the way that was actually the side of his head. Yeah.
Yeah. The best evidence I can tell is Oswald was a convenient patsy and may or may not have fired the shot.
Let me ask you: Do you have cable?
Do I have cable?
Cable TV?
I turned off my television approximately 8 years ago.
Oh, okay. Well, then, this is one of the cable channels. It's I guess you pronounce it Reels, REELZ. It's on the Reels cable channel. They've been showing it all week, and I've watched it 3 times. Usually, I don't care about I just always subscribe to that single bullet theory, but and that there was a third shot that even possibly came from the front, but this fellow put out I had never heard of this theory before, and like I said, it was very persuasive, but it's on the.
I forget whose show. It might have been Ivy West, or I forget. It's one of the earlier shows today. Jim Fetzer guested on it, and he's done a lot of research on it. Anyway, it's not that important to me who did it or how they did it.
I was just using it as a. I was just using the comparison of the way they covered up the JFK case with the way they covered up Roswell.
The way they covered up Roswell. I will tell you this. I've had experiences since I was a little boy, and I'm talking age 4 and 11, with abductions. And when those memories started to resurface, and I started to look into it, I knew back when I was 13 years old that the government was lying to us. And that was back in the early 70s. So I would totally agree with you that on your point about that.
Well, we've interviewed many, many, many witnesses who told us that they were threatened with their lives. I mean, these are first-hand witnesses said that they were threatened with their lives by the Air Force or the Air Corps back then, if they ever talked about this. We had others who said that they were forced to sign non-disclosure agreements, which they are still honoring to today. And if you get enough testimony like that, you say, they really did cover this up. And if you get it, it's also nice to have witness testimony to go along with physical evidence. And what the Roswell case lacks right now is the physical evidence. And so it's mostly a witness case. Well, it is a witness case right now, but we are working on we are working to get something else besides just witness testimony. The smoking gun memo is one of them. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a document. We know we know its provenance. It came from General Ramey when he had the press conference. It's not something that one of us cooked up in our basement and said, "Oh, here's a memo." We know where this memo came from, where it originated. So,
yeah, very, very well said. And Keith, I want to thank you for calling in. I'm going to have to let you go though because we're getting ready to wrap this up. Are you there?
Well, thank you so much. I'll call again next time. Thank
it's great talking to you. Thank you for calling in. Okay. Yeah, I want to wrap this up pretty soon here, but did you have any kind of closing comments? For one, I wanted to run by your, where is your book available? It's on Amazon.com, correct?
Yes, it's called Inside the Real Area 51, The Secret History of Wright-Patterson. And the book is about Wright-Patterson. It's not about Area 51. But we use that title because most people, when they hear the term Area 51, they think of UFOs, right? Mm-hmm. And we wanted to let people know that the real Area 51, where there were UFO artifacts, was Wright-Patterson, and it was there for a long time. And there's been no other book written about Wright-Patterson. There have been mentions of it. Even our own Roswell books sort of leave off where when the material and the bodies are taken to Wright-Patterson. That's sort of the end of our book. So we wanted to capture what happened after that. What happened to the wreckage? What happened to the bodies? Mm-hmm. What went on with UFOs there? And so there's a whole story that we tell about Wright-Patterson, about Roswell, about artifacts, about UFOs in general, how the Air Force deceived everybody, that they had closed down their Air Force investigation, which they never did, by the way. Mm-hmm. And so it's all in our book. You can get it at Barnes and Noble, at your friendly Barnes and Noble dealer. It's on stock. It's in stock there. You can also get it on Amazon, www.amazon.com. You can get it in paper edition. You can get it in Kindle. You can get it in audiobook and any other, whatever the electronic things are today. You can get it on Amazon.
Excellent. And I do want to thank you, Tom, for being on the show tonight. It's been awesome to have you on, and I hope to have you back again too. So anytime. Okay. Yeah, and also Steve Travesty, thank you for calling in, and thanks for the questions in the chat. Those were good questions tonight. And I do want to thank everybody for tuning in this evening. Make sure you stay tuned for Shiny Side Out with David Dunger and Mecky. And that's coming up next, of course, to sail you on into the night from down under. And be sure to tune in next week when my special guest will be Mike Barra, and he will be talking about his new book, which is called Ancient Aliens on Mars. So that should be an interesting thing altogether there. And you mentioned something, they cemented up one of the rooms or something like that. Was it Hangar 23?
Yes, Hangar 23 is connected and has always been connected to Building 18 below the surface. Each of those structures go down several levels, and that's where the stuff was kept. Well, after the material was shipped elsewhere, they cemented up the floor to Hangar 23. So you can't tell that all the stuff that went on beneath ground level. So if you go to Hangar 23 today, you won't have any indication that there are levels beneath it, because that floor has been cemented over to where it looks like there's nothing underneath. So that's what they do. But Wright-Patterson itself, a lot of stuff underneath several levels, not only Hangar 23 and Building 18, but many other structures on the base. It's all underground. Mm-hmm. It's all underground because you can see the air vents coming through the ground, right? Mm-hmm. You see these air vents, those things like you see on the ships.
Right.
Yeah. So a lot of stuff went on at Wright-Patterson, and a lot. Well, you can learn about it in our book. It's all in our book, and we've gotten excellent feedback on it. Just like our Witness to Roswell book, the feedback has been outstanding, and we're gratified.
Yeah, that's awesome. You guys did a fabulous job on that. And, I'm wondering, I know this might be speculation, but it seems to me with all the access to the aliens that they've had, you'd think they would be doing some real hardcore genetic engineering with hybridization in the underground.
You never know.
Yeah. That's what I would suspect anyways. And I think we have enough anomalies on this planet to maybe justify that. I hope you do find more evidence, and I do hope that they come forward with more physical evidence. I don't know if that'll happen, but
we may have something for you next year.
Excellent. Well, let's run the energy for that. And I know you said you were sweeping the test site again, or you were sweeping the area of the crash site.
Yes.
Did you find anything?
Yes, we found some couple items. The weather was absolutely brutal. The cold and windy, and it was right during the government shutdown.
Oh.
So that affected it as well because it was on government property, you know, and it just affected some of the people who decided not to participate because they were on, you know, they had worked for the government and had their pensions, you know, so they didn't participate. But the weather was bad. But we did get a few days out there, and this particular dig, we concentrated on using metal detectors. And whenever we got a ping, we dug there, and we did dig up some things. No memory metal, but some things that we are analyzing.
Excellent. Well, let me know. Come back with me on that one when you find out what's going on with the debris. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and I don't know if I have a question here or not, but I was going to ask you, and I forgot. Darn it! I'll come back to me in a minute. I think Jackie Gleason was kind of connected to UFOs, right?
Yeah, Jackie Gleason was a big UFO buff. He had all the books on UFOs, and when he lived in Florida during the Nixon administration, he was a golfing partner of President Nixon, and during one of their outings, Gleason told him, Nixon, of his interest in UFOs. Well, that night, after Gleason went back home, late at night, there was a knock on his door, and it was the president, President Nixon. He says, "Jackie, follow me." Gleason says, "Mr. President, what are you doing here?" He says, "Follow me." Well, Nixon gets in the car. His Secret Service is not with him. Nixon's driving, and they drive to Homestead Air Force Base in I don't know what city it's in Florida, but it was nearby. And they go into a secure building. They're waved on through because it's the president. And he takes them into a secure building with no windows, and there on a gurney or on a slab is a creature from another world. Whether it's one of the Roswell cadavers, or one from another crash, we don't know. But he showed Gleason one of the extraterrestrial bodies.
Wow, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and Gleason's wife at the time is the one who relayed the story. But Gleason himself was very interested in UFOs. He had a house built, I think it was in New York, in the shape of a saucer.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. That was pretty cool. I wonder who bought that house.
I don't know.
Be kind of nice.
Yes.
Maybe he meant something when he said "to the moon, Alice," huh?
Yes, to the moon, Alice. That he knew what he was talking about.
I'm telling you. Well, Tom, it's been a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. And have a great weekend. I'll see you next week.
Listening to Revolution Radio.